Hi, I'm Linda Shenton Matchett, and welcome to Moments in History. I'm an author, speaker, and history geek. During the research for my books, I often unearth intriguing facts that don't need to be included in the stories that I write, so I've created this channel to share information that I hope you'll find of interest. If you've watched this channel in the past, you've seen me on here wearing a 1940s outfit, either with a snood and a dress, or my Rosie the Riveter outfit with the coveralls and the handkerchief around my hair. As you can see, I'm wearing a bonnet and a blouse for the 1800s, which is where most recent books have been set. So today I'm going to talk to you about covered wagons. I've got a little bit of a diagram, and I will share this again through the length of the video. The top is the Conestoga wagon, and the other is the immigrant farm wagon, which is what folks used when they went west on the Oregon Trail. They're also known as Prairie Schooners. And I don't know about you, but I am terrible at packing my car for long distance trips if there's lots of stuff to take. It kind of feels like I'm playing a game of Tetris, and needless to say, I always lose. The immigrants crossing the country may have felt the same way. Can you imagine trying to get everything that you would need for a 4 to 6 month journey, as well as the items that you might need when you arrive in a unit of space that's about the size of a half bathroom? Sounds like a lot of capacity, but frankly, it's not. So where did the name Prairie Schooner come from? It was derived from the wagon's white canvas cover that was also called a bonnet. And from a distance, it looked like the sailing ships that were known as schooners. So smaller and lighter than the Conestoga wagon, which was used for hauling freight. It was much smaller and able to cross the desert much better. The Conestoga, as you can see, has a body that angled up on each end, and the reason for that was to keep cargo from tipping or falling out, because these were used as shipping and freight carriers. So the typical box, the sides of which were lower than those of the Conestoga, was about 4 feet wide, 9 to 11 feet long, and 2 to 3 feet deep. And then with the bonnet on top, the wagon stood about 10 feet tall. And then the length of the wagon from the front of the tongue to the rear measured about 23 feet. So not quite half the size of an 18-wheeler of today. The box sat on 2 sets of wheels that were different sizes. The rear wheels were about 50 inches in diameter, which is just over 4 feet, and the front wheels were about 44 inches. The wheels were made of wood with iron bands fastened around the outside of the rims, and then the wood would shrink and the metal rims would separate, and that would need to be repaired for them to continue on their journey. So the white canvas bonnet was made out of 10-ounce cotton duck of a double thickness, and it was cantilevered in the front of and the rear so that it would give them better protection during the inside during storms. And then the ends could be closed up, could be drawn, closed, and tied for still more protection from rain or dust, as well as giving the folks privacy. And then in order to waterproof it, it was coated with linseed oil. So a typical prairie schooner weighed about 1,300 pounds empty, and then full, it weighed a little bit more than 2,000 pounds, but the general goal was to keep it less than 2,000 pounds. And all of the family's belongings had to be packed into the wagon and left absolutely no room for beds. So the heavy pieces of furniture or crates of supplies were placed low in the wagon box to keep the wagon from tipping on those rough trails. And then storage chests were built to fit snugly across the sides, and then others could be lashed to the outside. Extra space was created by partitioning an area under a false floor, and then there were pockets that were sewn in the bonnet that went across. So every inch of space was used as possible. There was a man named Joel Palmer, and he made his first trip west in 1845, and he created a travel guide called Journal of Travels Over the Rocky Mountains, and he recommended the following list of supplies per adult: 200 pounds of flour, 30 pounds of pilot bread, 75 pounds of bacon, 10 pounds of rice, 5 pounds of coffee, 2 pounds of tea, 25 pounds of sugar, half a bushel of dried beans, 1 bushel of dried fruit, 2 pounds of saleratus, which is a chemical compound that was the precursor of baking soda, 10 pounds of salt, half a bushel of cornmeal, half a bushel of corn, parched and ground, and a small keg of vinegar. And again, remember, that's just for one person. So you double that if it's a couple, and then you add even more if there are children involved. As I said, with the possessions stowed aboard the wagon, there generally was not a whole lot of room to ride inside. But besides that, the ride was pretty rough. If you think about the fact there were no shock absorbers, and the tires were wood with metal rims, so certainly not the rubber that we have today, it was a pretty hard ride. Teams of 10 to 12 horses or oxen were typically used to pull the wagons, and mules and oxen were definitely the preferred animal to use. And then several more animals would be kept in reserve to replace those who had become lame or worn out. The ox teams were not controlled with reins like you would a horse, so the driver walked alongside the animals and either spoke or gently used a whip to guide them. Wait for this, the rate of travel for wagons was about 2 miles an hour, and the average distance covered each day was about 15 to 20 miles. So think about the fact that you are strolling along across the country for 15 to 20 miles a day. And then at night, the families either camped under the open stars, or if it was inclement weather, they would sleep on the ground below the wagon. Needless to say, travel was arduous, and river crossings were especially stressful. At the beginning of the trip, larger rivers often had ferry crossings that were able to take the entire wagon across to the opposite shore. But the smaller rivers did not, and certainly as the groups progressed west, there were fewer ferry locations. The luxuries had disappeared, certainly. So settlers would either construct a raft to carry the wagon across, or they would drive the wagon through the river. Naturally, first they would have to take the time to scout out the lowest and shallowest part of the river, and then the wagon beds were treated underneath with wax to seal up as many cracks as possible, so that it almost acted like a boat as it was floating across the river. However, it was definitely dangerous to cross these rivers. So the covered wagons were very solidly built, but that did not make them infallible. Breakdowns occurred all the time, especially since they were traveling thousands of miles. The wooden parts broke, as well as the metal parts, and roadside repairs were the only way to get families moving again. It often involved taking everything out of the wagon, fixing the wagon, and then repacking the wagon. Would you have been willing to fill a prairie schooner and head across the country for a new start? I'm certainly not sure if I could. Thanks for tuning in to Moments in History. New episodes are generally available every other Friday, so be sure to click the bell to receive notifications so you don't miss a single installment. And for even more history, visit my blog that can be found on my website at www.lindashentonmatchett.com. Have a blessed day.